this committee to order. And I guess we'll start off with roll call, please.
Hey, Representative Allred,
Here.
Representative Andrew,
Here.
Representative Berger,
He's here. He's coming.
Representative Brown,
He's coming also.
Representative Closton, Representative Lawley,
Here.
Representative Overmuller,
Here.
Representative Provenza,
Here.
Chairman Northrup.
Here. Thank you, Diane. All right, so we're here to work House Bill 223, which is Wyoming preschool providers. This is Speaker Summers' bill. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'll just turn it over to you.
Mr. Chairman, fellow committee members, the Education Committee over the past two interims has had K-3 reading as like its number one priority. If we want to affect K-3 rating, we need to start before K, frankly. And so we need to have good programs out there in the state that do the work of early childhood education. We are Wyoming, which means we don't want to make anything uniform. We like our own programs in our own communities that are supported by our communities. So what this bill does is it takes the revenue off of the Wyoming Education Trust Fund, which is a $5 million pot of money that spins off about $250,000 a year in grants, and we take that money and we reorganize that trust fund to where the priority for it is, in fact, the only priority for it is early childhood. And so what this will do is dovetail with a current early childhood program that WDE administers that is actually TANF money out of Department of Family Services. And so this federal TANF money currently funds a small grant program for early childhood education that WDE administers, and it grants money throughout Wyoming to providers, to early childhood providers. So that's the first thing this bill does. And then the second thing this bill does, if you go on to basically to page 6, section 3, you'll see that it appropriates $50 million of school foundation program money into this account for this early childhood fund. And so it puts $50 million into the Wyoming Education Trust Fund of school foundation dollars. And it also takes the interest that it takes the fund that already exists. So basically, if you did all of this, it'd be like 55 million. That would then generate money for providers to ask for grants. And the rest of the bill, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time unless you want me to spend a lot of time. The rest of the bill really are the sideboards that were really the creation of the existing grant programs. So the TANF program has sideboards on it due to the sideboards of TANF. So any of the sideboards for TANF goes to these TANF children programs. And so what you're seeing here is that, and I think it's a good idea. In other words, if these are kids at risk. So what we're going to do is create a early childhood program for at-risk students across the state of Wyoming. What we're going to do is enhance an existing program, as a matter of fact. And so that's basically the, I can walk you through the bill. Basically, we go in to 21-22-102. So chapter 22 is the Wyoming Education Trust Fund. So we go into 102 and you can see where we amend it right off the bat in A, Romanet I, to the Department of Education for distribution to preschool providers to provide preschool programs for economically disadvantaged students who are at risk. And then the rest of that whole section on 1, 2, and 3, and really 4, really goes to what the sideboards are for that other program. And if you go, let's go to 3 in Romanet or in subsection C, a preschool provider that serves economically disadvantaged school students who are at risk may apply to the Department of Education for grants to provide state financial assistance under this section. 4, you see salaries, expenses for accounting, insurance premiums, building lease, on to 4, costs of trainings. These are all things that my understanding, and the director of DFS is in the back, and she'll be able to tell you, these are all sideboards on the spend that are currently under that TANF program. So it's identical. You could make it different, but my objective was to make it as similar to the other program as possible, since I was dovetailing the two together. And then if you go on to the bottom of page 5, subsection E, the department shall annually distribute grant funds to selected preschool providers on or before October 1st, and no event shall grants awarded exceed funds available. Grants received under this section shall only be used for the purpose for which the grant is awarded and shall not be expended for any other program, activity, or purpose. And then obviously on page 6 in subsection F, the Department of Education shall promulgate rules necessary to carry out this section. And then, Mr. Chairman, if you look at the repealers, basically I've changed the whole program for the Wyoming Education Trust Fund. And so it just repeals those sections of the Wyoming Education Trust Fund that are not appropriate now. And so before, the trust fund would have spun off, I think it was for innovation in education projects, which I think, so for example, 21-22-106, which is, let me see, 21-22-101C, for example, is until the balance is established, until it reach 50 million, the governor shall annually recommend to the legislature. So we're not doing that anyway, so it repeals that section. 21-22-106 is basically distribution of trust funds available to public schools, innovative program grants. And so it repeals that, and it repeals 21-22-107, which is the rest of that program. So it basically creates a new program under the Wyoming Education Trust Fund. It adds in school foundation dollars to provide preschool grants to children at risk. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I just have a risk clarifying question concerning the preschools. Are they licensed in Wyoming? Preschools, are they licensed at all? Or just mentioned a preschool, so it doesn't talk about licensed or not licensed, and I really honestly don't know.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. To my knowledge, they are licensed. WD would be able to answer that question better. But yeah, they are, particularly these types.
The follow-up is a presumption that this would be for licensed preschools, the grants.
Go ahead, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, if you want to make that crystal clear in here, have at it.
Okay. Representative Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, this is sounding somewhat similar to our childhood development centers. And I want to know how if this is in any way related to that system.
Go ahead, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So in fact, they could apply for this grant. So I don't know about the ones in your community, but like the ones in my community, they actually get some grant money out of our counties. Our county commissioners give them a little money. So they find they have some statutory money. They get money from local donations. They get money from local government. And I believe, and I think the director could clarify this, or WD, but I believe they get some grants out of this at times, but I think they would certainly be eligible.
Representative Brown, you have a question?
Thank you,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly applaud the idea of going for at-risk. My question is, why was this not made broader and having a more detailed impact for all students, not just at risk, and looking at preschool and potentially even a pre-kindergarten style and put it towards maybe the block grant and or opening this up. I feel like we could have impacted more children in that fashion. What was the reasoning behind this?
Go ahead, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman, that, really good question. And so, actually the idea behind this effort, this session actually came from the chairman of appropriations. And he wanted to know what we could do. And so we kind of looked at, in fact, we charged the director of DFS with looking at this issue. And the need is so much, right? If you go too large on this, you can't afford to do anything on a broad scale. So what we asked and found out, and I believe the director of Family Services will be able to talk to it, is we found out there was a substantial need just in this high risk category out there that we're not able to handle. In other words, the grants that are going out, there's way more people wanting these grants than are getting these grants. And so I think, and in my own mind, I believe it, if we can affect high risk students, we're gonna affect the total a lot better, right? If we can bring those up, then I think it rises that boat rises, basically that water rises all ships. So that's the reason. No, there's a lot of need out there. I totally like a pre-K program, but to fund it is hundreds and hundreds of millions.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, another one is the impact of what this does. And I'm just kind of curious of what the Education Trust Fund and as far as the innovative program grants that would then be cut out of this. What have districts done with that? Has it been a successful program at this point? We're going to move it from one pot to the other. I'm just kind of curious what the impact on those grants is going to look like and whether or not the school districts are going to, I don't want to say suffer, but if we're going to have some school districts that were depending on those grants.
Mr.
Speaker.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that you have districts depending on those grants. Certainly districts have used those grants. Probably the impetus for this was there's twice now been an attempt to completely shut this down and put it towards the corpus. And when I was hearing that in one ear and I was hearing this idea of getting some preschool grants, I came to the conclusion. And then once I looked at the language in here, which you in fact could have used it, I think, for pre-K perhaps, if your public school had one and it was an innovative idea. But I guess over time, we haven't added a lot of money into it. It said, build it up to 50 million, ask the legislature. We haven't done that, which means to me that there hasn't been as much need for the innovative grants as I certainly believe there will be for preschool grants.
Representative Provenza, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I know there's substantial evidence that supports that preschools reduce the costs and burden on Department of Corrections, perhaps 18 years later. Are you aware of any of that? Was there any discussion about potentially what those long-term savings could be if we were able to implement some of these grants to support these programs?
Mr.
Speaker,
Chairman,
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I've heard that through my career in the legislature and what I've also heard, and I don't have the numbers, but for every dollar you spend in the preschool level, it's the best dollar you can spend. It has the most impact. And the reason we've never, I think, in Wyoming gone to a more unified, let's say 4-year-old program is local communities like their local thing. We don't like unified. We kind of like our own deal. And each community has these programs that are doing really well in their communities. And I think if we can help support that, I think we'll get to right what you're talking about, particularly these at-risk kids or more at risk of being in the Department of Corrections later on in life. So.
Absolutely right. Go ahead, Representative Berger. Okay, anybody else?
But in a simple.
Anybody else have a question? Okay,
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to leave this good bill to you guys and you'll do your work or dirty work on it. And
You
I
will do your work.
and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, can we have the departments up? I don't care which one goes first. Hi, how are you doing? Nice to have you in education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Corin Schmidt. and I'm the Director of the Wyoming Department of Family Services. This is the most I've appeared before education, I think, in my career. So this is nice. I just wanted to provide some answers to the questions that were asked, and I'll start with need first. What we estimate right now is about 2,000 kids are receiving services, preschool services through the TANF preschool and through Head Start. We don't know the numbers on the Title I preschools, and the Department of Education may have those. What we know is that there's about 3,300 more kids who could qualify for these services. So in terms of need, we know that there's quite a few more who would definitely benefit from this. In regard to Representative Brown's question about focusing on low income, the National Institute for Early Education Research says that if you're a state that does not provide a lot of funding for early care and education, that at least focusing on low socioeconomic children is the place to start. So unless there's a massive appropriation, the recommendation is that you start there. And as the good speaker had mentioned, it's one of those issues where the tide floats all boats. Certainly, we are interested in preschools from a Department of Family Services perspective. It is an excellent form of early intervention. And we know that through preschools and engagement with parents, that parents are more able to engage with their children, which is what we want and see, because we know that has a long-lasting positive impact, and hopefully we don't have to get involved.
Questions for Dr. Schmidt? Go ahead, Representative Brown.
I really hate to ask you this question, but does this muddy the waters with us wanting to potentially look at some of our other statutes that you've mentioned to us previously? And, you know, we're looking at opening this, let's say this passes, does this muddy those waters on what we are trying to do in the future with some of the other issues that we see with these programs?
Go ahead, Dr. Schmidt.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, you did bring up another answer to a question that was asked. So in answer to your question about does this muddy the waters, not necessarily. The grant program exists. It's existed. So the Department of Family Services receives about $20 million a year in what is called Temporary Assistance to Needy Family Block Grant. That's the old welfare. Of that $20 million we get, 1.8 goes to the Department of Education specifically for TANF preschools. And that started in 2001. It wasn't as much back in 2001, but the amounts of TANF money going to the Department of Education has grown. So that program has existed for a long time, regardless of our licensing standards. In regard to the representative's question about licensing, and this is complicated, licensing is not required for child caring institutions affiliated with governmental agencies, including school districts. So if a preschool is affiliated with a school district, licensure is voluntary. So that is where it gets difficult. So regardless of how that preschool is getting funded, where it's located makes a difference. And then it's depends on the administration of that particular area to decide if they want to be licensed or not. And again, just another plug, I think that's another good reason to take a strong, hard look at the licensing statutes, because we do not carve out preschools unto themselves. We say anyone who's providing services under that statute must be licensed unless you are associated with a governmental entity or you're not big enough, or what's being proposed right now that you are a preschool with very limited hours and numbers.
Go ahead, follow up.
Does this in any way, shape, or form affect the Part B issues that we've had with, that we have some of the money that flows from the Department of Ed over to the Department of Family Services for 0 to 3. But we've had the discussions to try to move that back in the past. I'm just curious if these have any discussion or any implication in that fashion at all.
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, if I were the Department of Health, I might say that it has a problem, but but not the Department of Family Services.
Sorry, wrong. Yeah,
No, that's quite all right. So the question you're asking is about Part B and Part C monies, which do go to the Department of Health. Some of those are passed through the Department of Education. I think what this does is add more to the Department of Education's plate. I mean, it's a lot more money, but in terms of complication, I don't necessarily think so. As Representative Summers mentioned, a lot of these providers kind of stack those dollars. So you can have like a child development center, for example, be receiving Part B monies, Part C monies, TANF monies, Title I monies. So they can stack, and a lot of their request has been if we could get organized, we being the agency, so that when we look at those requirements, we're not unnecessarily complicating their lives as well, which again goes back to that licensure issue.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for bringing her back into her old role as Deputy Director of the Department of Health.
Mr. Chairman,
should.
Representative Brown, no problem.
Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what I'm hearing you say is that it's probably been intentionally set broad with regard to the facility with not requiring licensing, not inserting that requirement based on what you just described as the current state of the situation concerning some that are licensed and aren't. So you contemplate that those that are not licensed, according to the exception carve out there, would be eligible for the grants.
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, if they are affiliated to a school district under that exception, yeah, there's a list of exceptions.
Any other questions for the Director? Director Smith? Thank you.
Thank you.
WDE like to comment on the bill? Okay, does anybody have any questions for WDE? Representative Brown? No? Okay. Jab. Yeah, it was. Any other public comment? Any other public comment? All right, we'll close this public comment and work the bill. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill. Second.
Moved by Berger, second by Brown. All right. Any amendments or anything you'd like to do on page 1? Amendments on page 2 or 3? Okay. Amendments or comments on page 4 or 5? Page 6? Fiscal note, everybody understands?
I was gonna say, should we put 100 million in there?
Sensing the urge. You could bring it on
Question.
thank you. You can bring it on committee of the whole. Question being called, we'll proceed to vote. Thank you, Diane. Oh,
Can I just say one thing? Please,
sure.
as a special education teacher and a teacher who works with at-risk kids, starting early helps tremendously in the process.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate what everybody's thinking here and what we can do. And I know in my district where these funds are coming from, it would be accepted to do this with this money. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right, call the roll, please.
Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
No.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Clostin.
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Overmuller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrop.
Aye.
That's 8 ayes, 1 no, do pass.
Very good, thank you. We're up to House Bill 177, which is expulsion of a deadly weapon.
For possession of a deadly. weapon.
Well,
We're
for
not expelling the
possession,
deadly
we
weapon.
can,
Let's expel it as
but we do actually expel the deadly weapon. but- Okay. For all you English teachers out there, we're gonna do House Bill 177. Representative Harshman, please take us through the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hearing the bill, House Bill 177. This expulsion obviously is a very important issue. It doesn't happen very often when it does. And I think if you look at this part of the existing statute, 21-4-306, Mr. Chairman, and this paragraph C is what is being amended. And I printed off, you know, the entirety of the statute. And paragraph A talks about expulsion can be from public school during the school year. And Romanet 1 is about this continued willful disobedience, open defiance of authority, school personnel. Romanet 2, willful destruction, defacing school property during the school year. Romanet 3, any behavior which in the judgment of local board of trustees clearly detrimental to education, welfare, safety, morals of pupils, abusive language, habitually disruptive. Romanet 4, torturing, tormenting, abusing a pupil, maltreating a pupil or teacher with physical violence. And then Romanet 5 is what this bill deals with, is possession, use, transfer, carrying, or selling a deadly weapon defined under Wyoming Statute 61104 on a school bus or in a school, on school property that's used for education of K-12 students. So Mr. Chairman and members, so this paragraph C then talks about, paragraph C says the Board of Trustees, well, you can see it there, subject to the case-by-case modification by subsection D. And this requires, subsection D then refers to, you can read it down there on line 15, refers to 1 year of expulsion for any one student that is determined to violate A5 of this section. A5 is the deadly weapon. So that's what we're talking about. And that's what paragraph C refers to. And it says paragraph D allows, up on line 12, allows the superintendent with the board's approval to deal with these on a case-by-case basis, because there's a legal process to it. Requires them to requires a school board to notify your local authorities. And so there's a dual process going on. We're just talking about deadly weapons now. And so why did I bring this bill? My daily job, right, had 2 loaded this fall. And so I've, it's like my 32nd year, great school, 127 years, just after statehood, this school was established, right? It used to be called Casper High back in the day. And it's, unfortunately, it's happened in public schools. And so, so really what I guess my thought behind this, and nobody asked me to bring this, it's just my thought as seeing this every day. You can see it starts on the bottom of page 1, new language to add to this paragraph C, where it starts with the, and then all the new language, Mr. Chairman, of the bills on page 2. Board of Trustees may require the district superintendent to expel any student determined to violate that paragraph A5, which is the deadly weapon paragraph of this section, for more than a year if the district provides educational services to the expelled student in an alternative setting after the initial 1-year period. So let's talk about expulsion and services for a minute. State law doesn't require districts to provide services to an expelled student. And they can be expelled for 1 year. Most of the school districts do, however. I mean, I think they all probably do. And maybe there's somebody here who can talk to that, but I saw some data on that, and the vast majority do provide services. I didn't go into that and changing that, but with this new setup, if the district says, hey, this is bad. This kid's in the middle of his junior year, and maybe he's not coming back in the middle of his senior year. Got another 4 or 5 months. We'll go ahead and provide services. And really, I think this bill, and when I talked to the Senate co-sponsors, and I think they're correct too, I think. And maybe somebody on this committee's got an idea. I think we should amend it through the process to really require. And I think the legal system does that, right? The legal system would require counseling and service. The last thing you want to do is take a student, a kid who's brought a loaded handgun to school, and then he's gone and now he's isolated. And so I don't think that happens. I mean, I think the court would require, and maybe this bill can require some of that. And for somebody who violates that A5 deadly weapon, needs some counseling. I mean, you need, obviously, if something's not right, you're bringing a loaded handgun to school. So that's it. And so I think the bill can be improved, but this is why I bring it to you. That's it. So I'd stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Harshman. I'm sorry, Representative Harshman. Almost called you Mr. Speaker. You guys have questions for Representative Harshman? Go ahead, Representative Carly. I'm sorry, Provenza.
Mr. Speaker, God, he wasn't even my speaker. Representative, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So what this bill does is, what is in law right now is that you shall expel a student who brings a deadly weapon. Seeing a head shake
Go ahead.
on the
Representative
first
Harshman.
year.
Mr. Chairman, yes, but paragraph D allows the superintendent with the board's permission to treat these on a case-by-case basis. So yes and no, but there is a part to recognize you deal with these on a case-by-case basis. And on the speaker thing, funny story, it's been a few years ago, I was home kind of being a little bossy, and as you married gentlemen know, where your depth chart lies, you're at least number 2, and then every child you have, you drop to 3, 4. And if you have a nice dog, probably 5. But my youngest son says, "Hey, Dad, easy. You're not the speaker of this house." I go, very true. Yes, dear. Okay, but anyway, just a little story there.
Any other questions for Representative Harshman? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, thanks for bringing this up. This has happened in our district as well, our Mr. Harshman. Representative, but no, Chairman.
Let's go with that.
All right. And I'm in favor of this, and I would like to maybe ask, well, I guess we'll work the bill and try to add that next part, because I believe counseling through those traumatic events would help. Is that what you think as well?
All right, anybody else have any questions? All right, we'll proceed to the department if you'd like to comment on this. No comment from the department. Anybody like to make public comment? Come on up, sir. State your name, rank, serial number.
Mr. Speaker, Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association.
got a
I think-
promotion.
What's that?
I got a promotion. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't call you Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. You guys got me doing that now. I apologize. Mr. Chairman, members of the Education Committee, I think most of you know that I've been a superintendent in at least 3 districts. This is a good bill in my estimation. Again, there is permissive language in the bill to allow the superintendent to deal with each case on a case-by-case basis. As you can imagine, a student who went hunting over the weekend, forgot to take their hunting rifle out and comes to school. We deal with that a little bit different than a student who comes to school and has actual harm that they're looking to do. I think the option of allowing a student to be out for more than a year is good for not only the perpetrator or the person who is, I guess, the alleged perpetrator, but also possibly for the victim too. As you know, I was a superintendent of one of the smallest school districts in the state. I could only imagine having a student who brought a gun to school to do harm to one of my students in that school, and then only being able to have them out for 1 year and come back the next year and be with with my other student who was threatened by the student who's out. Again, I think that there's some issues with how long that student may be out based on courts as well, and whether we would have to do services. There are a lot of options for school districts at this time to provide those services after that year with some of the virtual stuff and everything that's going on. So again, I would, I support the bill and would say, please vote to pass this bill. And I'd take questions after that. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So, Mr. Brown, can you tell me, and just refresh everybody, between the time of expulsion and the first year, what happens to that child?
Mr. Chairman, there are numerous things that can happen. Originally, before we had some different options out there, most students were just expelled and out on the street. I think most districts try not to do that at this point. There are, I would say, quite a few districts that have programs that are in our juvenile detention centers to work with them. So that may be what would happen. They may work with that student to do homebound services. I would say in most districts, we would do a psychosocial evaluation on that student to see if they were going to do harm to themselves or others in that 1 year. But I think there's a lot of different options out there, especially with some of the virtual programs now, that they would try to keep that student engaged in the education process as they're going through, if they're going through the judicial system, and if they're not going through the judicial system, working on that, working with them in another way.
Thank you, sir. So I'm gonna ask, would it be a burden upon districts if we change this to include counseling and education from time of expulsion until the time that they re-entered the school district?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's kind of an unfunded mandate. Just thinking off the top of my head, most school districts do not have somebody that we would want to, or I shouldn't say that. Most school districts do not have a qualified counselor to do the things that would be required with that person. So they would be paying an outside counselor. I think most of the time, whenever it gets tied into the justice system, that is taken care of. But I think that I don't think that there's any school district, like I said, most of the school districts that I was in when we had this issue, we actually did do a psychosocial evaluation on them, and then whatever was recommended there for counseling was taken place.
Okay. Representative Provenza.
Mr. Chairman, I was just gonna mention that, yeah, in these instances, it seems as though the child would then go through our justice system, and hopefully through that would then receive services or be asked to complete those services outside of the school setting.
Representative
Mr.
Brown.
Chairman,
I'm sorry.
and I would say that our juvenile justice system does a really good job with trying to get our kids involved in that. So
Excellent.
spot on.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Brown? Dr. Brown. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your presence. Anybody else want to comment? Anybody online? Anybody want to comment on this? Anybody from the public? All right, we'll close public comment and proceed to work the bill. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by everybody and seconded by everybody. Moved by Obermiller, seconded by Berger. Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up with that last comment that I made. In sometimes that when we put kids through this system, what we're seeing in some counties is that there just isn't the services that are necessary. So I don't know that I would say that we shouldn't look for something else. I guess it just is to say that it kind of complicates this. And maybe we do want to figure out some way to include the mental health services that might be needed for this. I don't know exactly how to do that. And it's going to vary by county because we have such varying degrees of what youth can access in terms of services for stuff like this. So Yeah, that's just to say this complicated.
Is. Go ahead, Representative Berger.
I do know, if you're a child with a disability and this happens, by statute or I believe with IDEA, following those rules, those services have to still be provided. And as far as I know, in my school district, we continue to help these kids and I don't see them not helping this. And I understand Representative Provenza. So, I mean, if we want to see it in statute, we can, if we just want to trust the districts to continue with that work in the court system, I think we can do that as well.
Goes back to local control. Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I'm thinking of is if we get this out to the floor, this is the only area that we can change and modify the title of the bill is in committee. And if we don't have something in here that modifies this, if this is something we want to go down or we eventually would like to look into this out on the floor, I think once you start going into the modification of the title of the bill out on the floor, it becomes a much different conversation. We can certainly modify anything we want in committee. So if there is an interest in wanting to require this, this would be the time to do it. I don't know where I stand on the idea personally, because similar to what Representative Provenza was just saying, and also what Dr. Brown had mentioned, you have the situation where the kid brings a hunting rifle in. Do we necessarily need to require them to go to counseling services? I don't know how we word that in. I don't know how we massage this and make it palatable, but just thinking out loud that if we're going to do this, we need to do it now so we can at least massage it out on the floor.
Thank you. Representative Harshman, Chairman Harshman, you had a question or
Mr.
comment?
Chairman, members, and it's probably a little Romanette under the C and permissive type language, not requiring or encouraging type language we sometimes write. They're already doing it, but maybe it's a committee of the whole or second reading amendments we think on a little bit. I think the part, it's got educational services in the bill already. The title really isn't that broad, but it's
Agreed. Representative Van-
no, I think we'd be all right. It's
Somebody wants to break.
Okay, Representative Lawley.
Again, I tend to think that we not amend it because again, even permissive is kind of, again, I would love to encourage it, but again, coming from a rural area, we don't have the services and that's another issue I'd love to see us talk about, in an interim about the mental health issue and how it overlaps with education and what do we do in communities? And I know all the communities really have a lack of, they don't have all the services they need, but the rural communities are really bereft of services, shall we say.
Go ahead, Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like the way this is written on a local control level, the case by case and the may, but I really like Representative Brown's idea about the title. I'm thinking about something like considerations in dealing with expulsion, the possession of deadly weapon. I mean, does that give us enough leeway that we could add something later?
Good work. Representative Provenza, you had a question?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if question, I guess I'm in working through this and having these conversations about the considerations and other things related to this. I worry if we kind of go down this path that the body will kill the bill.
I do too.
And I think this is good policy change that will help alleviate some issues with expulsion that I have, quite frankly, have issue with expulsions, but yeah, so that's my other concern is we bring it with that attached to it. We're going to hear a lot of the same rhetoric we've been hearing.
Right, it's a clean bill now. Go ahead, Representative Berger.
So here's what I was thinking. How can we tie this new piece, instead of just reading for just expulsions of a deadly weapon, Why can't we just tie it to the entire statute? Because there's many expulsions, there's many different types of expulsions. And for many different reasons, you know, what do you think about that, Mr. Chairman, or even Representative Harshman, Chairman Harshman?
My first thought is that it's a clean bill the way it is now. And that maybe that's an interim subject that we go in and look at expulsions and dive into what's happening there. But I'm sorry. Chairman Harshman. You have any thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I agree. I agree. I think with everybody, everything they've said, I think we all recognize that we try to, mandate or suggest what's really already happening. Because people are out looking out for the best interest of kids. I mean, that's what school districts do. And I think, the vast majority are getting services. And I think that parallel legal process in this is probably where that's going to require services. And I think it talks about that in this statute at, in 21. Well, let me see. I think if I can find the reference to where, but anyway, this, I think it's 31.7. And 6.1.104 maybe, but I don't know, maybe we can dig into that a little bit if this bill comes up on general file at our pace,
Yes.
yeah,
All right.
so. Not be something to ponder for another year or another term. Cause you'll need 2/3 next year, but.
Okay. Committee. Is there any, we're gonna work the bill. Is there any amendments on page 1? Anybody willing to try an amendment on page 2? Question's been called on the bill. Let's proceed to vote.
Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
Aye.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Clausen,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
That's 9 ayes do pass.
Thank you, Representative, for bringing the bill. We all agree, and it's an important issue. Thank you. Representative Speaker Coach is right. All the hats you wear. Right. Yeah, most important. Okay, we are up to House Bill 192. And 192 is Education K-12 Food Service Program. That will be presented by Representative Clausen, and you're on the hot seat, sir. Go ahead when you get the mic going.
Okay, Mr. Chair, committee, thank you for hearing this today. This was brought to me by Speaker Summers and asked me to work this bill. Our school districts each year write off about $125,000 a year of students who aren't paying for their meals, and they're not covered under the free and reduced. So doing a little background on this with my district, kids doesn't have any money in their account. Our district lets them go 4 or 5 days without having money to pay for the meal. They contact the family, say, hey, do you need to come in and sign the forms for free and reduced? Some parents still don't. It used to be in our district after so many days, then the kids get what's called the minimum meal, which is a cheese sandwich and a carton of milk. Problem with that is everybody in the school lunch knows that kid doesn't have money for their lunch. So luckily in my community, a group got together. It's called Thanks for Kids, and they raised about $5,000 a year to help pay for kids who don't have the money. So that's a great partnership with the community, but not every community has that. So when this was first presented, it was talked about, could the state pay this $125,000 a year to help these districts with kids who aren't paying for it? The problem with that then is the districts probably could get a little bit lazy. So what this bill goes through and says it's a 50-50 split, up to $75,000 a year of state funds. As you read through the bill, if there's more requesting that, then it's kind of going on a pro rata schedule. The bill lays out the duties of the school district and of the Department of Education. But at the heart of this bill, it's really a method to help some of these districts pay for these students who aren't paying for their meals. I think it's a great bill. Again, it's not selfish in my nature. Luckily, we have this partnership with our community. We do have a responsibility for some of these kids throughout. So this would probably just get rid of the minimum meal requirement. These kids could get a full meal, which might be their only full meal of the day if this is how their families are feeling about them. That's the heart and bones of it. I mean, we could work it page by page if you like. But I think that pretty well describes what the bill does.
Go ahead, question. Representative Brown.
Representative Clausen, I think I know what the answer is, but I just want to make sure on page 5, line 20, we talk about every student that's in school every day that it's in session. And one of the things that we had in this school district with ARPA funds was summer school. And I just want to make sure that this would cover summer school lunches as available. And what I saw in this community was a lot of students that attended summer school were typically Title I and had some lunch provided or had lunch provided. But when the ARPA funds went away, that drastically was renegotiated. So does this cover summer school?
Representative Clausen.
That's how I read it. I mean, it's every day that school's in session. Now you're going to have, when summer school's over, right? You're going to have those weeks where there's no meals. Most of the Title I kids, I would hope, are already signed up for the free and reduced, so that should be covered. Again, we're talking $125,000 throughout the state. And again, not every school is going to utilize this. They may not have to, but I guess I read it. I don't know if you guys think we need to add anything to include the summer, but
Just clarifying is right. Any other questions for the good representative? Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My school district, before session, I'd been approached for something similar. And one thing that they had mentioned to me was that once that ARPA funding has gone down, we've seen like half the number of kids buying lunch. And so then previous years, so you have kids who just don't even try to buy the lunch, and then the debt's not there. And so did you hear that from other districts? Is that something that maybe Albany County is having that issue more so than others? Or was there a conversation about why that might be happening that was different than we just have maybe more kids who can't afford lunch and aren't then filling out that paperwork or doing the other things?
Representative Clausen. Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chair. We ran through the same thing in my county where our free and reduced numbers are way down at all the schools. And it's not that all of a sudden people have all this money they're not qualified for. I think it's a paperwork problem. Our district has been working really hard on contacting these parents and trying to get them signed up for the programs. So I just think it's a statewide issue on the paperwork.
Any other questions for Representative Clausen? Go ahead, Representative
We
Berger.
also talk about summer.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, we'll open it up to public. If you'd like to come up and sit back up here, you certainly can. We'll take public comments on this bill. Does anybody in the department have anything they'd like to add, subtract, or comment on?
Mr. Chairman and Committee, Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education. I just wanted to clarify a couple of points that were made. The funding that was utilized over the last few years during the COVID pandemic to provide free meals to all students was through the National School Lunch Program. That provided those meals through summer as well, and during the school year. So any district could have availed themselves of that funding, and many did. Many that, or some that were not on the National School Lunch Program prior to the pandemic, did go ahead and participate to be able to take advantage of those funds. So I just wanted to clarify that it was the National School Lunch Program and the seamless summer meals that have afforded that.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Berger.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I can't remember.
Shelley Hamill.
Shelley, thank you, Shelley. And those funds that were coming in, they were federal funds in what department that they was come from?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, those can, the Department of Education does have the child nutrition team that receives the USDA federal funding and oversees those programs.
Follow up.
Go ahead, follow up.
Yep, I thought military department was also providing that, or am I mistaken?
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm unaware of that. They may have had some provisions as well for military families, but
Okay.
the
All right, thank you.
Questions for Chief Hamel? Anybody? We appreciate you clarifying. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments from the public?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ken DeCaria, Wyoming School Boards Association, we'd be in support of this piece of legislation. Mr. Chairman, as you know, and committee, this is not something is funded through the block grant model. I mean, there are no funds that go to this. They have studied it a few times, Picus and Auden. The legislature has requested that they look at this issue a couple of times, and I believe it may be in the 2008. They did recommend if they were going down this road, this would be one way to do it, is to provide part of a match for the school lunch program. But Mr. Chairman, at the end of the day, I think this would be helpful. You know, I know that nobody wants to turn a kid away at lunch, you know, and see them go hungry during the day. If you're trying to educate them, you know, if you don't meet the basic needs first, education goes pretty far down on the list as far as those students. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think this would be useful. I think it could be utilized by school districts, and Mr. Chairman, it has to be applied for, and there is a match in there. So I think their proper safeguards are in place. And with that, Mr. Chairman, happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. DeCaria. Any questions for Ken?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
sir, for
members
the
of the
comments.
committee.
Okay, we'll close public unless there's one more. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Janine Bayteski from Teton County. You know, the other real issue that we deal with on this free and reduced lunch issue is the definition of what the poverty level is. And the poverty level is set at a pretty darn low level. I know that when I was on the National School Board, we tried to get Secretary Cardona to look at this and try and find a way to reevaluate what the poverty level was, and it went nowhere. I know some of the superintendents have worked through AASA to try and do that as well, and it hasn't gotten very far. But this to me is really probably one of the more critical issues that needs to be addressed with this whole free and reduced lunch and feeding kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for it? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not sure if this is for you or somebody else or anybody who knows, but do we know what the level of the income level is to qualify for free and reduced lunch?
Go ahead, Janine.
Mr. Chair, Representative Carlson, I have a rough idea, but I would rather turn to Shelley if she could. Phone a friend. I think it's around $40,000 for a family of four. Am I? Maybe it's, I may be off 38, 40, something like that, but it's not very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else want to comment? We'll close public comment. Anybody online that wants to comment? I guess I should ask. Thank you. All right. So we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Provenza moved it, seconded by Lawley. Is there any, before we start, is there any comments anybody would like to make? Okay, then we'll move directly into page 1. Is there any amendments or any comments on page 1? Page 2? Page 3?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead. Representative Andrew.
I would like to move that we amend on page 3 following line 16 to add a Romanet 5 that I would state evidence of a good faith effort to collect the balance owed for unpaid meals. I think this language might be necessary so that so that we at least have something in here stating that the districts know that they still have to try to collect that balance from the parents of these students, and so that it doesn't unintentionally turn into a free lunch program that is, you know, put on it's a cost for the state and the school district, basically.
Representative, could you please restate that again so everybody makes sure we get it correctly?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Essentially on line 17 and a Romanet 5, evidence of a good faith effort to collect the balance owed for unpaid meals.
Okay. Everybody get that? Been moved and seconded. Comments? Question? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Okay, that motion is passed. Any other additions or amendments on page 3? Page 4? Page 4, page 5, amendments? Most of the new languages in here. Okay, we'll move to page 6. Page 7. Anybody want to comment? If not, we'll proceed to vote. Question. Please call a roll.
Okay, Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Andrew.
Aye.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Clausen,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermuller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye,
That's 9 ayes, do pass with amendments.
thank you. Thank you, committee. Friday, we have a plethora of bills to work, and so we're gonna have to be in here just right after we adjourn and grab your food, and we'll come in here and eat in front of everybody, because we're gonna do a bunch if we can. Ending with Representative Ocean Andrews. So we want to get to his bill, so. Just saying. 5. That's why, one of them's an easy one, but that's all we got. Yeah. Can't get, there, it's all back on. We're adjourned. Now we'll go off.